Yes, hello and welcome to the second Cloud Automation Office Hours. I'm, Thorsten Höger. I'm a tech consultant, consulting tech leads on cloud automation on AWS, and I hope a lot of people have a lot of questions that we can answer today. Until then, I can answer a question I get a lot of times. It's about the new service from AWS. It's Code Catalyst, Amazon Code Catalyst, which is, Amazon will never call it like this, but it's basically the Amazon version of GitHub. And the question is, what does it do? Where will it go? And the most important questions I get a lot of times is, what does this mean for the existing code services like code commit, code build, code deploy, and code pipeline? And good answer to start is nothing changes. So you can still use all the old services, not the old services, the existing services. It's just a different feature set. So when you want a solution that has all in one, which provides you with a UI, dev environments, pipelines, workflows, PR requests, all these things, use Code Catalyst. If you have an existing solution or you have special requests, what you want to do with it, use existing tools and build your own custom-built solution using code commit, code pipeline, code build, and all the other tools in the code suite. So that's one of the first things I get a lot is, what happens to the code suite? Nothing will happen to the code suite. In fact, it's basically the tooling that powers Code Catalyst. So it is here to stay because it's the underlying technology for Code Catalyst. But now let's see if somebody else has a very important question I can answer. Anything cloud automation related, CDK, AWS in general, code pipelines, or detailed question to Code Catalyst, or anything else you can think of. Just post the questions in the chat, and we'll have a look at them. Until then, another question I get with CDK a lot is, how can I decide in my CDK code to do one thing or another thing depending if a resource already exists? And so the short answer is you can't, but the longer form is why you shouldn't. In my opinion, this question comes from a point of where you want to see, like, I don't know what's in my environment, and then I deploy something, and depending on the current situation, different things should happen. And that's definitely not how a declarative and deterministic approach for infrastructure as code looks like. So first of all, you know what's there because you deployed it in this stack or in another stack. And the other thing is you define a target state. So your template should not take into consideration what's already there. You say, this is how it should look like. And then I hand it over to AWS, and AWS will then reach this state coming from a known and well-known previous state. So any magic that's doing like, let's see if this resource already exists. Normally there's another way to do it. And this is most of the time the better way to do it. So we get another first question, step functions versus Lambda with CDK. So first of all, first part of the question, step functions versus Lambda. If a task that I want to solve is completely doable using step functions, using the native SDK integrations, I would always go this way and implement it in step functions. The biggest benefit of step functions versus a Lambda function with your own code is it's not your own code. So you don't need to updated it. There's no dependency management, no updating the runtime, retiring node 12 or whatever. If it's implemented in step functions with the native integrations, it will never go away. It will just stay there and it will run forever. So whenever you can implement it using a step function, use a step function instead of a Lambda function. Always use a Lambda function if the alternative is running a server or a container for it. But if you can do it in a step function, that's even better. With CDK, yeah, both of them is possible in CDK. With step functions, there's different ways to build them in CDK. So one option to build a step function in CDK is using the Amazon State Language file, the JSON file, and just create a step function using this definition. Here, do this. The other way is having a CDK object model with a Fluent API to build a step function definition in CDK using higher level constructs, which sounds nice to start with. But in the course of improving and evolving your step function gets very, very messy. So I'm not a big fan of using the CDK model for defining step functions currently, because there are no higher level abstractions. So you still need to write all the steps of your step function, and it's hard to read. And especially with something like called Workflow Studio, which is a visual designer for step functions, I prefer building my step functions using this visual designer, then exporting them as a JSON or YAML or whatever, and using this as my source that I then deploy using CDK. There are some things that could be improved here, and I have an upcoming stream about this with the AWS conversations with a fellow hero, where I talk about a CDK construct or a construct library I'm currently writing that helps you using the JSON definitions, because you can write them in Workflow Studio, but still getting type safety when integrating them into CDK. So that's definitely something. There is room for improvement. Both options have their downsides, but still both ways are better than writing your own code in a Lambda function, because you don't need to manage the runtime and the dependencies. Does this answer your question? I assume. Otherwise, we'll just handle the follow-up. Any more questions from the audience about cloud automation? Yeah, okay, it answers the question. So yeah, to elaborate on this a little bit more, I definitely recommend looking into step functions, even if you're running a Lambda function. So you could also combine and say, yeah, this is something I need to do in a Lambda function, because it's not calling a native AWS API using the SDKs. It's calling a third-party API, or it's doing complex calculations. It only can be done in a Lambda function. That's totally fine. But then you can still strip down the Lambda function to only doing this complicated part and nothing else, and put everything else in a step function. And then your step function will be your entry point. And only this complicated part will then call out to the Lambda function, and only this will be done in Lambda. But all the error handling, validating the event, parsing the event, calling something else before or after the complex part, all this can still be done in step functions, and only some part of calculation or one API call is then done in a Lambda function. I'm surrounding my Lambda functions with step functions, even if it's a single one call Lambda function, because I get the error handling. Just retry it. Retrying something is much easier in step functions, and it's cheaper. if I implement something like, oh yeah, call this. If it doesn't work, wait for a second and try it again. If it still doesn't work, wait 2 more seconds and try it a last time. Which means 3 seconds of waiting that I have to pay for in Lambda. If I do this retries in step functions, I don't pay for the wait time, which is even, yeah, more expensive if I don't wait a second but a minute or something like that. Okay, then the follow-up question is, when it's about contributing to the CDK with your own custom functionality. I think I'm not on the CDK team, so I cannot, I can just assume what they think. But currently they are on a way to not adding more higher level abstractions, but building L1s and L2s and building a complete implementation that's based on Lambda functions or step functions, for me, sounds as an L3. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know your use case exactly, but on a first glance, it looks like an L3 construct. So really an abstraction of a use case. And their current approach is not adding L3s to the core, but creating or let users create their own construct libraries that are on Construct Hub with these L3s. So you can always start writing your own construct library, putting it in this L3 construct library, publish it on a Construct Hub, see if people like it. And if enough people like it, you can still create an issue on the CDK or on the RFC repo that, yeah, I've got this construct library. It's very popular. Is there any idea, any desire or any wish or objection the other way to add this to CDK? And then it's code there. There's a reason why it's there. People can discuss on it instead of, I got an idea, should we add it to the CDK? So basically, it's limited to L1s, which are auto-generated, and L2s, which abstracted in a type-safe way in the core library. And for L3s, let's start in a construct library and then move it back into the core if it gets a lot of popularity and demand. But definitely interested into seeing this, because creating a native step function target for some event bridge rules could be an interesting use case. So just let me know what you built, and happy to look into it and talk about it. So any other questions? Currently not. Just write it in the chat. I will see them. I just want to go back 1 second to the thing I discussed with the existing resources. The existing resources, because I really see this question coming up a lot, either directed at me or coming up as an issue on the CDK repository, is what to do if this resource already exists or not. And I really want to make sure that it's not being lazy that it's not implemented, but I didn't understand the use case, or I still don't understand the use case. Because if I don't know if a resource exists, where should it come from? Because I'm owning the infrastructure. So I'm building the infrastructure. So who should have created it if not me? So the only reason I can imagine that this might be interesting is I deleted a stack. The resource was left over because it had a deletion policy of retain. And when I recreate the stack, it's already there and should be adopted. But that wouldn't be the same resource, because normally CloudFormation or CDK will create the resources for you, and it will create the resource names for you. So it will not be the same resource. And even if it should be the same resource, is it safe to assume just, yeah, there is some instance or there's some database lying around, let's just use this? I'm not sure if magic is the right thing to do in this case. So if you have any real use cases for this thing, I'm happy to learn what you want to achieve and if this is really a need. But I see this question a lot, but not a real use case why this really should be there. So it would really be interesting to see what's the reasoning behind this ask. That's really at least 1 or 2 times a week this comes up. So it's not random or a unique idea. But I didn't get any answers yet on what the exact use case on this is. So, any other questions on cloud automation? S3 bucket names. Same thing. Especially for S3 bucket names, I love the CloudFormation auto name generation because they need to be globally unique. So I don't want to come up with a unique name on my own and, oh yeah, it will explode maybe on deployment. So I love the CloudFormation feature of randomly generating a new name for me because it's pretty obvious that it would not be there. And then auto import would also not be the thing. So it would not be like, oh yeah, this bucket already exists, so I will import it. It's not an option because it's potentially not your bucket. So the thing is, use random suffixes and the follow-up was naming conventions across a company. You can have naming conventions. The naming convention would still be like stack name dash resource name dash random suffix. If you really need to have a naming convention, there are reasons. Company policies are a bad reason, but it's often a reason. Try to get rid of the reason. If it's not possible, add a random suffix. Because especially with S3 buckets, with their global uniqueness, if you rely on getting or creating a bucket with a certain name, this could go wrong. It could go wrong either by chance because somebody else used the same name, or it could go wrong on purpose by some third party that's trying to attack you or just nag you. If I know your company policy and I can create buckets that prevent you from using this policy, yeah, I can do it. It could be fun. So whenever you rely on something that others could, hinder you to do it, then it's not a good idea. So especially with S3 bucket names, don't rely on any naming conventions because there is no way out. If this needs to be this name and this name is already gone, there is no way to fix this. So you need to have a way to handle this. And if there is a way to handle this, like, then you can use another name. Why not using the other name to start with? So especially with S3 bucket names, don't rely on naming policies. That will fail at some point in time. And as always, it fails in the worst possible moment. Yeah. So any more on this? So especially if it's something else. And if it's your own resources, you know what's there and what's not there. You still can import it. So if this is a thing, you still can import it manually. Like, oh yeah, I know that there is a previous version of this database. I want to import it. You're happy. Yeah, you're fine to do it. CloudFormation has an import feature. It's not very usable in CDK yet. They're working on it, but you can use the CloudFormation console to import an existing resource in your stack. So there is a way, but you know it, and it's a manual process. It's not like on deployment, just do it this way or the other way. So yeah, about name sharing. This is not something that happens out of the blue. So you will have like, oh yeah, I'm creating an S3 bucket. I want somebody else to write data in it. So I deploy my stack, the bucket gets created, and then I tell all my customers, all my users, my third-party dependencies, this is the name you should use. This is the bucket name you should send data to. And it doesn't matter how it is named. They shouldn't guess the name. It's a name I created. They shouldn't guess, or yeah, I know how this will be named, so I can just send data to it. No, you need my permission and you need my information what the bucket name will be. And it doesn't stop there. So even if it's a name that's coming from a policy and you know how this will be named, so the sender, in this case it was a fire hose, could just send to this bucket. It just doesn't work because they also need to know the ARN or the ID of the key you use to encrypt the bucket. And that doesn't have a common canonical name. So you still need to provide them with information. This is the key you should use. So it doesn't matter if you only tell the ID of the key or also the name of the bucket. And if you don't encrypt it, that's another problem. But so there's always something to give to others that might not be following a policy. So don't try to do naming conventions. I think it was Back to the Future 2, but names are for graveyards. So don't rely on names. Do references, send things over, reference them using parameter store if it's the same account, some cross-account lookups, whatever way. Do another way and send over names instead of relying on names having a certain format. As I said, it will fail. There's one prominent example. I don't know a way to circumvent it, to build it any other way currently, but the CDK uses well-known names for all its IAM roles, which is a big problem, not for the IAM roles, but for the asset bucket. So the asset bucket has a well-defined name. So I could create S3 buckets with this well-defined name for any account ID because it's part of the name. And then this account will never be able to do a CDK bootstrap, which could really be a threat vector. If I know the account ID of somebody, let's just create CDK asset buckets with a common name for this customer in all regions, and eventually they will have a problem. So that really is a thing. I think it's called name squatting. So anything else? Any other questions about automation, about CDK or serverless or anything? How to handle stateful resources with stateless resources. I'm just putting it here. Automating. Maybe you can elaborate in the chat a bit more on detail what you mean. I just try to guess. It's about the separation of stacks. I'm not a big fan of separating stacks for stateful and stateless resources, because what's the thing you try to evade? So sometimes you see something like create a database stack and create an application stack. So whenever you want to tear down the application stack, it will not impact the database stack. But why would you tear down the application stack and not the database stack? And that's a manual thing. Within your automation, you will always deploy all your stacks. So whenever you change something bad, so if you make a mistake in your CDK code or in your CloudFormation code that will destroy the database, it doesn't matter if it's one template or 3 templates or 5, because all of them will be deployed. And if you did a mistake, it will destroy the stateful resource, no matter which template it is and no matter which stack it is in. So you should not rely on, it's in a different stack, nothing will happen. There are other ways, like deletion policies, like restricting access to the role that's deploying that, yeah, you're not allowed to delete databases. So things like that, creating backups in different accounts. So there are ways to prevent data loss or problems with stateful resources. And if you have these in place, and you need to have them in place, then there's no problem in putting everything into one stack. And it's way, way easier, because if you put everything in one stack, you can use inner stack references, normal ref and get at in CloudFormation, or just normal references in your CloudFormation template. If you move things to different templates and different stacks, it means that you have these cross stack references with imports, exports, or parameter store, or whatever, which it really makes it hard to change things. It will break eventually. So I think your pain will be bigger if you separate it because of things like cross-stack dependencies than the chance of accidentally deleting something because it's in one stack. So put everything in one stack. The only reason to go beyond one stack is your template grows bigger than 1 megabyte or 500 resources. Then you need to split it up, but that's a different story. That's not about separation of stateful and stateless resources. It's just about there are so many resources, it just is too much for one template in one stack. How to do the deletion of a stack? You delete a stack and you redeploy and the database already exists. That's the thing. When redeploying the stack, I would not import this database. You can do it, and you can change things on imported resource. There's a difference between looking up a resource in CDK, then you cannot modify it because it's just referenced. But if you really adopt a resource in CloudFormation, starting from this point, there's no difference in it was created by the stack or not. If it's adopted by CloudFormation in this stack, you can modify it as with any other resource you created using CloudFormation, because there is no difference in this resource. When looking up resources and importing resources to reference them, you cannot modify them, but it's a completely different thing than adopting or importing a resource in CloudFormation. But still, I wouldn't do this. I would create a new environment, and for a database, for example, import the data using your database administration tool of your choice. Or for S3 buckets, copy over the data using a copy command. It's not something you do all the time. Normally, this is a disaster recovery scenario or some big migration. So if you really tear down your production environment and rebuild it, there was some serious things going on. And then your problem is not adopting the database that was already there. And as I said, there's a very important difference between importing a resource in CloudFormation and importing or doing a lookup in CDK. That's completely two completely different things. So, do I have any more questions? So yeah, when moving data between S3, then a huge amount of put events. Yes, this will cost money. But Yeah, so the one thing is it will cost money because you move things. Yeah, the name will change, so things will change. If you come to the conclusion that it's easier to import this resource, do it. It's perfectly fine. It's possible. Import the existing resource. There are reasons to do it. That's why this feature is there. But the feature being there doesn't mean that it should be your first way to solve the problem. So whenever you can recreate resources, recreate them. If it's not possible or crazy expensive or several hundred third parties need to change things, import resources, look for different ways. But it should not be your first approach and you're always doing it like this. But yes, there are reasons. You mentioned the Kinesis fire hose riding to a bucket. Maybe you want to use the same bucket again, or it has a million or millions of files or terabytes of data in it. Maybe you want to reuse the same, or it has object lock on it. You cannot get rid of the old one and it needs to be compliant for 10 years or more. Yeah, that's exactly the cases where you want to import resources, and it's possible, but it's an extra effort that needs to be done when recreating the stack. So S3 put events, I assume you mean notifications, event notifications. That's another thing. When copying data, event bridge notifications will hit. It depends on which way or which kind of notifications you use. If you use the event bridge notifications, they can be added to the resource later. So in this case, what I would do is create the infrastructure without the put objects notification or the object created event, then move over all the data, and then with another update, add the events for all new data so that not the move triggers your whole processing that's happening in your event bridge and your event bridge rules. So that would be a thing then, shutting it down, moving data, and then adding this. Or if it's a normal event bridge rule, you can disable it. You could disable the rule during this import. Or delete it. It's a stateless resource. You could just recreate the notification. So that's definitely something I would think of. Disable events when migrating data, because it will just flood your whatever downstream Lambda function SNS that's handling this data and maybe handling it again. Yeah. Okay. So, do we have any other questions? Yeah, something else. Looking forward to it. Yeah, event bridge pipes. So event bridge pipes are for point-to-point communication. So they make it easier to create point-to-point, basically event bridge rules, but for point-to-point communications like Kafka, Kinesis, SQS to something else. So you get a message, you do something with it. Normally you would have written a Lambda function that's triggered by an SQS message, doing something with it, storing it, or sending it to somewhere else, DynamoDB streams or whatever. And I think event bridge pipes really make this easier. You still can write a Lambda function, but it's the same with the step functions before. You lose a lot of glue code. Your processing of the event is still in a Lambda function, in this enrichment function, for example, in event bridge pipes. But the filtering and the being triggered and all the things and handling of errors, this can be offloaded to event bridge pipes. And the good thing is you can filter in event-bridge pipes, and you only pay for the events that make it through the filter. So this is really a benefit if you want to look at things and filter them. I don't need this, I don't need this, I don't need this. Event-bridge pipes really help you to not do this in a Lambda function and pay for a lot of Lambda functions that just say, I don't care. So is it possible to do one event bridge rule to multiple consumers? Now, event bridge rules are also to one target, but you can have different rules on the same source. So for example, for an event bridge event, you can have two rules on the same event and trigger two things. And the same event will trigger both rules and both targets will do something. With SQS, Kinesis, DynamoDB streams in this case, it's one consumer. You only have one consumer. So if you add two pipes or two Lambda functions to it, every message will go to one of them. The next message might go to the other one. But every message only hits one consumer. That's basically the thing between a queue and a pops up like a topic. And that's exactly the thing. Event bridge rules can have multiple, or you can have multiple rules on the same source, but you have one pipe on a single producer, and it will get all the data. You can have multiple pipes, but then they will only get partial data. So it's not both pipes will get the same data. Then you need to split it. But yeah, Kinesis might be, because with Kinesis you can also do parallel reads. So it depends on exactly the source, but basically pipes are meant for one-to-one connections. Think of SQS. With an SQS, more consumers can be there, but every message will only hit one consumer. But for more details, there are very, very good talks from reInvent about this launch of this new feature. It's a pretty new feature. I think it will also change in the coming month, get more sources, more targets, more features. So definitely keep an eye on it and look at the announcement talks at reInvent. There were really, really good talks about event bridge pipes and the things. Yeah, with Kinesis, you might have the option to do one producer to many consumers. But still, it depends on, is it still one-on-one per shard, or is it really per shard multiple consumers that all get all the messages? Yeah, really need to look into it. There might be one-to-N mechanisms, but definitely not many-to-many or things that you can do with the topics. Also, a rule could hit multiple producers. A pipe does not. Okay. Yeah, I think that's the best thing, and I think that's also a very, very perfect finishing up this session. You have to play around with a lot of things. Play around, try it out. Same with step functions, how to create step functions if you decide to do this in CDK. Try it out, try different ways, and see what fits your use case, what fits your approach on software development. Maybe you like the ASL files better, or you just hate JSON and you say, I don't care how ugly class object is I just don't want to touch JSON. That's also an option. So whatever you like and whatever fits your use case, try it out, play around with it. Or like one of Olga's always says, go build. Just do it, try it out, and see what works best. So yeah, I think this was another great installment of this office hours. The next one will definitely happen. I will post it on my social medias and will link it. Or it will also happen on this YouTube channel, so you can find it there. You can subscribe to the channel and you will get a notification whenever I post the next video or the next stream announcement. So happy that you were here and looking forward to our next events.